Hey everybody, in this episode I'm talking to Steve Glaveski. Steve is the author of Employee to Entrepreneur. He's an Australian entrepreneur. He actually helps companies to become more innovative, and he helps individuals who want to be innovative within a company or to go and start their own. So if you're someone who's kind of bored at your job and wants to find a way to spice things up and bring a new idea to work, or if you want to leave your job and go and start your own thing, Steve is the guy to check out. We have a great conversation. We talk about everything from deep work practices and mindfulness to why you only need a 6-hour workday to actually be more productive, to practices for getting better product market fit and making your product 10 times better than the competition. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. My first question is speed. Again and again, you're talking about speed, and I've been a part of organizations that move at all kinds of speeds, fast and slow. Why is speed so crucial? It comes up so many times in your book.
Speed is absolutely fundamental to success, Brendan. And the reason why it's so crucial in the entrepreneurial domain is because unlike a large organization where you may have a lot of certainty around who your customers are, your market, your distribution channels, your price point, all that stuff, as an entrepreneur setting up a new business, you haven't got any clarity around a lot of that stuff, or very little at least. So you're operating in an environment of very high ambiguity and uncertainty. And so speed is required in order to learn what you need to learn to figure out what customers want, what the business model needs to look like, what product features you should build, all that stuff. And that's something that, I didn't come up with that. That came out of the military. John put in the famous US Air Force pilot. He was a big proponent of this thing called the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And one of the reasons the American Air Force beat the Koreans during the Korean War 10-1 in the sky was because they had a much shorter OODA loop. The rate at which they could observe, orient, decide, and act was much shorter than that of their adversaries. And two fundamental reasons for that I talk about in the book was because the US pilots, they piloted F-18 jets, and those jets had a 360-degree bubble canopy, whereas the Korean fighters flew Russian MiGs, and they had limited vision. And the F-18s also had a fully hydraulic throttle, so they could also not only make the decision quicker, but also act on it much faster, whereas the MiG had a semi-hydraulic throttle, so much so that the Koreans had to lift weights just to pull that throttle back. So, getting that feedback loop, that OODA loop, or whatever you want to call it, down to as tight as it can possibly be just means you're going to learn much faster, so that a 6-month period for you can learn a hell of a lot more than another organization who has a very long feedback loop and has to resort to calling a meeting every time they need to make a decision.
Yeah. And so when you're working with people and they're trying to build things that are going to move quickly in a slow-moving organization, how do you get them to pick it up?
Yeah, that's a great question. More often than not, the one thing that is standing in the way is a lot of policy, process, and also ingrained habits and belief systems. So policy and process could be that every time we need to make a decision, for example, if I'm in a larger organization, we need to get a business case signed off if we want to explore a new idea, right? And that business case needs to go through several people, and we need to have a few meetings. And by the way, these people are away on leave right now. They're not going to be back for 2 months. So let's push this meeting back a couple of months, and then you know how it goes. And before you know it, it's 6 months down and we haven't made any decisions, right? So one thing that needs to change is if there are any processes or policies in your organization that stand in the way, it's about redesigning or coming up with parallel processes to support that speed. That's one thing. And number two is about tackling that culture, because people have, depending on the type of the organization, oftentimes we look to outsource accountability because we don't want to make a decision for fear of being wrong. But when we do that, it means that we just slow things down to a T, because one way we outsource accountability is by organizing something like a steering committee meeting or something to that effect, which is very process oriented and just slows us down to a T. Now, one thing Jeff Bezos talks about over at Amazon, which I'm a massive proponent of, is type 1 and type 2 decisions. Now, type 1 decisions are essentially decisions that are irreversible. They're massive decisions whereby we definitely need to get some heads on the bus. We need to as Ray Dalio says, we need a meritocracy of believable people to come together so we can share ideas. We need to get this challenged by people who know what they're talking about and then come to a general consensus. But most decisions aren't type 1 decisions, Brendan. Most decisions are type 2 decisions, which means they're reversible. We can make the decision, and even if we screw up, that's okay. We can fix it and move forward. So even if we screw up 10 times in a row, we're probably going to end up much further along the line than the organization who's still having meetings trying to get it, quote unquote, perfect the right time they do it. So the problem is with a lot of organizations, they treat every decision like a type 1 decision, so nothing really ever gets done. So we introduce them to concepts like these. And the best way to get people to buy into anything, not just different ways of working, is to actually immerse them in it, try it for a week or two, and see the results. And once you see the results, and once you realize that, hey, I can get way more done in less time, then people want to know more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Steve, when I was reading your book, I was thinking, man, I wish I had this book when I was still an employee, because a lot of what you talk about is how to make faster moves when you are in the organization, how to be an entrepreneur or find a passion project within your company. So if you're talking to a person who wants to do something like that, but maybe they're in a lower position in the hierarchy, they're not someone who can just make that happen for themselves, they have to work with people, how would you suggest that they advocate and persuade people that this sort of work is going to be useful?
Yeah, great question. So I've actually published an ebook called 22 Ways to Get Buy-in for Innovation Within a Large Company. So maybe we can add that to the show notes. But one such way that comes to mind is, I mean, you can preach innovation or entrepreneurship till the cows come home, but if you're dealing with people who just don't get it and tense up at the first sign of the word innovation, thinking, oh, that's risky and we've got a core business model to protect and shareholders to deliver our quarterly dividends to, then that's not going to go over well. What I've seen work well on numerous occasions is if you are that person and if you have identified some kind of a problem, come up with a low fidelity prototype, just something that purports to solve that problem, something you've put in front of a customer maybe and they've just trialed it off the books, and then show decision makers what you've done and tell them that, hey, it only took me 1 month and it cost me $500 of my own money to build this, and this customer liked it. So that's going to go a much further way than just talking about let's be innovative, let's be like Google, let's be like Airbnb and stuff like that, which you hear so often. We had an example in our organization where we worked with Asahi, the big beer company, and their employees wanted to start doing more innovative stuff. And we worked with them for 1 day, and on that single day, we actually built augmented reality beer posters, which we then put up in liquor stores and bars, and patrons were able to then scan the posters, play a bit of a quiz related to alcohol, more or less, and then if they got through the quiz and answered all the questions correctly, they would get free beer. And then they were able to also share this with their friends. So we video recorded the whole thing, and then when this set of employees presented the prototype as well as that video of people interacting with it back to senior executives, they were able to secure $500,000 to do more of that kind of stuff. Whereas that single day, it cost them about $5,000, and that was it. So you can learn a hell of a lot and also get a lot of collateral to get that buy-in from people quite easily nowadays. But you just need to be deliberate about how you do it. So show, don't tell is the lesson there.
Yes, show, don't tell. I love it. I wish we'd had this conversation a year ago, because when I started this podcast, it was something that I was getting permission to do, like on work hours and things. Like sometimes I'd show up late for work because I'd be doing a podcast or something, and I went through all the process of getting all the approval and then started doing it. But if I had done just one, and because people loved it, but if I'd done just one first and then said, hey, here's an old iPod with a recording of it, you can check it out, I won't put it out in the public domain, it probably would have opened doors much faster. I wish I'd talked to you sooner.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And that one thing I should touch on there is there's a lot of research that shows when people have a side hustle of some persuasion, whether it's a podcast or an e-commerce store or whatever, they actually become a lot more engaged in their day job because it doesn't become the be-all, end-all. And they've got this creative outlet on the side, which fills them with energy, and they learn things there that they can transfer into the mothership as well. So, employers listening to this, you should be encouraging your employees to work on that side hustle, because if you say no or if you don't allow them to do it, then they're probably just going to do it anyway, or they're just going to leave the organization in search of greener pastures anyway. So I think it's a very different working well today than what it was maybe 20 or 30 years ago.
Yes, that's so true in my experience. Like, I think of my happiest times at work were when I also had something else that I was going on. Like you said, it wasn't the be all end all. So for you, you've made this journey. You've been in and out of corporate world and having your own stuff and going back to school. What did that path look like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, growing up, I was what you might call quite a creative, curious kid. You know, I had hair down to my waist. I played in heavy metal bands, all that sort of fun stuff. But then I guess as I got older, I essentially sought to conform to society's expectations of what success looked like, which was donning the suit, cutting my hair short, so longer days, shorter hair, and eventually picking up gigs with the likes of Ernst & Young, KPMG, Macquarie Bank, which is an investment bank over here in Australia. And while you might say I had, from the outside looking in, the quote-unquote trappings of success, the decent salary, the business class flights, the corporate junkets, all that sort of fun stuff, deep down, I guess you could say I was miserably comfortable because, you know, extrinsic motivation is one thing, but intrinsic motivation, having that alignment with the purpose, learning something I really cared about, and that freedom to try things, not from things, but freedom to do things. I didn't have any of that. And I just found myself living for the weekend. And I think it was Steve Jobs who said, once you find yourself waking up too many days in a row saying to yourself as you look in the mirror that I don't want to do what I'm doing today, then something needed to change. So after about 10 years in the corporate world, I started to observe that there was a hell of a lot of vacant office space everywhere I went as a consultant. And so I just thought, well, maybe there's a gap in the market for an Airbnb for office space kind of thing, right? And that was around 2012, and that was called Hot Desk. So what I did essentially, Brendan, was put together a low-fidelity prototype. Cost me a little more than $2,000, basically using an Airbnb script, a web developer I'd found on freelancer.com, and within 3 months, $2,000, I had a working prototype that you could list space, search for space, book space, all that good stuff. And at that point, I thought, okay, I've got a prototype. Now someone needs to know about this. So I naively Googled how to write a press release, tried my hand at writing one, and then proceeded to send this press release to about 100 journalists whose email addresses I got from Twitter profiles. Whereas nowadays you can use growth hacking tools like Rocket Reach and Hunter to do that for you. But as you know, you read the book, but how many got back to me? One got back to me. Yeah, it was one, which speaks to the fact that luck always plays a part. Timing, luck, appetite, all that sort of stuff. But that one just so happened to be a journalist from the Australian, which is one of our biggest national newspapers here. They wrote the article, and within about 3 months of that article dropping, early stage investors had got in touch with me, and I raised about $150,000, which, you know what, it's not a lot of money, but it's enough to jump out of the corporate world and give yourself a year or two to try this thing that everyone's talking about called entrepreneurship. So that's essentially how I started to make that transition. But even before that, real quickly, we talked about the side hustle and just doing stuff on the side. You know, I ran a heavy metal nightclub on Friday nights while I was working at Ernst & Young. So it was, you know, suit and tie during the week and then like a Megadeth t-shirt or something on a Friday night. So it was essentially worlds apart. But I think that did make me a lot more engaged in my day job as well. Mm-hmm.
So Steve, you cover this path, and then you're someone who you seem to just live and breathe entrepreneurship. You've written a book about it, and you're so quick to come up with these quotes, stats. I've heard you on your podcast. It seems you absorb information, like you must have a real passion that's driving this interest. But what else do you do to help you to be so quick and agile mentally and to remember all this stuff and put it to use?
Yeah, it's a good question. And funnily enough, I don't think I remember anywhere near enough as I should, Brendan, because, you know, I've had about 150 podcast conversations. I've read hundreds of books. I, you know, subscribe to countless blogs and all that sort of stuff. So I wish I could retain a lot more of what I actually consume. But what I do nowadays to make sure I retain more of what I learn is really about, okay, if I'm reading a book, like at the moment I'm reading General Stanley McChrystal's book Leaders, which is a phenomenal book. And not only am I highlighting things as I go, but at the end of the chapter, I'll write down, okay, what did I actually learn? And then once I'm done with the book, I'll turn all of these learnings into a blog post so I can teach other people what I've learned. And if there are any key nuggets in there that I think I can apply to my own business or life in some way, I'll start applying those, and then I'll remember those. Similarly, I might take some of the quotes or lessons learned and turn that into a short 5 to 10 minute podcast episode as well. And by going through that process, you retain a lot more than what you would where if you had just read the book, not highlighted anything, not written anything down. The process of actually teaching other people what you've learned, I find, is one of the best things you can do to solidify those learnings. So that's basically it. But I think you can't retain information, or you can't absorb information if your emotional state's not clear, if you're not eating well, sleeping well. Sleep is fundamental to memory, particularly that non-rapid eye movement sleep, which is about 5 hours in an 8-hour sleep cycle. That's essentially key to learning. So a lot of people will say, read something or learn something and then have a 15-minute power nap, which I don't do, admittedly, but that's supposed to strengthen the neural pathways. So if you're not sleeping well, not eating well, then arguably you could be reading a lot of things and you'll be getting to the end of the chapter and you'll be reflecting and saying, what did I just read? Oh, let's read the chapter again, which I'm sure all of us have had that experience at one point or another.
Yeah, I mean, I think of school books when I was a kid, and the homework tonight is to read pages 15 to 31, and it was like my mind was just a counter, like just getting from one to the next. Okay, it's over. I did it.
Yeah.
But you said that having a good mental state can change that experience and being an engaged reader. And another thing that you cover a lot in your book is flow and deep work.
Oh yeah.
For people who aren't familiar with that or who want more of that in their work, what suggestions do you have?
Yeah, so I mean, deep work and flow, I'm sure you've covered it on your podcast before, but deep immersion in a single activity where the rest of the world fades away, and McKinsey found that we're up to 5 times more productive when we are in flow. I recently wrote an article for Harvard Business Review called The Case for the 6-Hour Workday, which deep dives into a number of different techniques, but at its core, I introduced a framework in that article called P-codes. So it's a visual mnemonic, a P-code, winter jacket. But essentially what it stands for is prioritize, cut, outsource, automate, test, and start your engines. So you could have a to-do list with 20 things on that list, but the universal law of nature, which is the 80-20 principle, suggests that maybe only 4 of those tasks are way more valuable than everything else on that list. So be really deliberate about how you prioritize what you're actually working on, what's going to move the needle. C is cut. So what have you always been doing that perhaps no longer adds value, but you just keep doing it because you've always done it, whether it's preparing reports, whether it's a marketing strategy or a channel or a sales tactic that's just not working, but you keep doing it. What can you reflect on in your business? Cut that out of the equation. O is for outsource. So whether that's delegating to someone in your team, or what I prefer, outsourcing it offshore for between $5 to $10 an hour. The offshore virtual assistants, some of them are really, really good. You've got to be deliberate about your instructions and cutting them a little bit of slack to get good at something. But once they're good at something, they are off and running. So when people say, oh, but it's just quicker if I do it myself, maybe if you're only doing it once. But if you're going to do this time and time again, or if it is a really monotonous task that's going to take 50 hours once, then there's a hell of a lot of benefit in writing out the instructions and offshoring that. A was for automate. So nowadays, more or less every other week, there are new tools coming out that can help you automate parts of your business. So right at this moment, we're actually experimenting with a tool called VOIQ, which basically does sales calls for you. It's not a person, it is essentially a bot. But at this stage, what it can help you with is things like qualifying leads. So we have about 500 leads that come through each month. Now, either I can call all of them, or one of my colleagues can call all of them, or we can have a bot that calls up, asks 2 or 3 qualifying questions, and then allows them to set up a call with me. That way, I focus my efforts on qualified leads rather than unqualified leads.
That could be tremendous in your line of work.
It is absolutely tremendous. Not only does it mean that you can focus on high value leads, but also it means that I do a lot less task switching, and it frees me up to focus on uninterrupted time, which is what flow is all about. And then the last 2 things in the P-codes framework was test. For the 2 biggest pitfalls people fall into when they ultimately sacrifice their productivity is jumping to conclusions and paralysis analysis. So if you're testing things as you go, you've got key metrics defined, you're learning what's right, what's wrong, you can adapt and focus on what's creating value. That applies to marketing channels, sales strategies, and so on. And then lastly was S for start your engines. So what can you do first thing in the morning to start your engine, whether it is focusing on the hardest thing first, whether it is meditating first thing in the morning, having a cold shower, those things that are going to get you into flow. So at its core, though, cut away interruptions, turn off your notifications on your phone, focus on one thing at a time, avoid the temptations to look at social media and your inbox, because our brain tricks us into thinking that the lowest hanging fruit is actually the ripest. And that's an evolutionary bias we have, because we wanted to conserve energy while we were running away from, predators on the African savannah. So focus on the hardest thing first as well, is what I would say. Do away with interruptions and just don't allow yourself to fall into the vortex of, Instagram feeds and things of that persuasion.
Yes. And you mentioned meditation as something that's helpful to you in powering up. And I was really surprised to read that, because I see images of you, I see your podcast cover, and you look like the Terminator on a motorcycle with sunglasses. And then I read that, oh, this guy meditates. How did you get into that?
Yeah. I mean, on the podcast cover, that's essentially what the byline is for the podcast is helping you navigate a brave new world, right? So the whole "come with me if you want to live" thing. So that was totally intentional. I do ride a motorcycle though. In terms of meditation, how did I come into that? So if I think about Plato's book, The Republic, he says something in that book which has stuck with me for years, which is no philosophy before 30, because you're just not ready yet. And it was around the time that I was 30 that I started seeking out answers. And so that's when I discovered books like Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. That's when I discovered Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Tendencies, or the Four Assumptions. Four Tendencies? Four Assumptions. I think I'm combining his book title with Gretchen Rubin's Four Tendencies. And I started exploring, for lack of a better word, spirituality. And that led me to meditation, because I did come across so many high performers, whether it was people in the music domain, whether it was entrepreneurs, whether it was artists, politicians, who all meditate. And I thought, well, it can't be all woo if all these high profile people who I respect are doing it. So I just gave it a shot. And like many people, the gateway drug was very much a Headspace app, or a Calm app. Did that for about 3 months, and then just started doing it myself and built that around some personal mantras like gratitude, presence, compassion, forgiveness, and also, more importantly than anything, I think, responsiveness. So being deliberately responsive to what goes on in my day rather than reactive. And so I meditate on those 5 things every morning for about 10 minutes. And that just clears the mental space, so I can focus, like we were saying earlier. Can focus, can read. If I'm reading a book and my head's full of noise from other things, I'm probably not really taking in many of those words. So, and one big thing I would say as well as part of the meditation, if I have something like a big keynote in front of 500 people to deliver, I'll also add on about 5 minutes of visualization to that meditation, and just walk through everything that's going to happen, like from my leaving my house to rocking up to the conference venue, seeing all the people. Maybe I'm going to start feeling a little bit, a little bit sweaty under the collar and whatnot. But if I have envisaged all of this beforehand, and then once it actually happens, I'm comfortable, because I saw this coming, so I'm good, and I tend to then perform at a much higher level than if I hadn't done that visualization. I'm like, oh crap, there's so many people here, it's going to be intense, So I think that's a really important piece. Even with some podcasts, I'll spend the time to visualize the conversation and how I'm going to manage my energy and all that stuff during the conversation. I think it's really, really important.
Yes, I find in my own experience, it's huge. It's huge. And you mentioned the things that you can cut, like spending extra time getting kind of caught up in the feelings that you get from looking at Instagram, but also then to add something that brings you back down to, like you said, being responsive rather than reactive. I think that's pulling on both sides of it, cutting and adding something to get you back on track. That's so valuable. Yeah.
We can go through our entire lives just operating at the whim of external stimuli, but I'm a big fan of Marcus Aurelius's book Meditations, in which he says, you have control over your mind, not external events. Realize this and you will find strength. And I think that's such an empowering statement, because we have so many things we avoid, or so many things that may set us off on a daily basis. But one, you can do those things that you avoid that you need to do, like making that sales call, because what's the worst that can happen? You have the power to choose how you want to interpret a rejection. You can interpret that as you're no good, or you can interpret that as, hey, what did I learn from this conversation? Maybe it just wasn't the right time for them. They didn't have appetite. They're working with someone else. Let's just turn this no into an eventual yes. Every no gets you closer to a yes. But also, if, I think that combines both things. So by taking that mindset with you, not only do you do the things you normally avoid, but also if something doesn't work out, you bring yourself back to that place of reason and calm quite quickly.
Mm-hmm. So you come into work and you are reasonable and you are calm, but you are consulting people, you're guiding people into how to be more innovative in their companies, and you're kind of going into their space. How do you lead them when you're sort of an outsider to the group?
Yeah, it's funny though. Sometimes, paradoxically, if I'm consulting to a large company, they tend to listen to people who are outsiders more so than people who are insiders. That's one of the big reasons people hire external consultants, that and also to get a stamp of approval from someone who is an internal to say, hey, we gave this piece of work to these guys. This is what they say. That's what we have to do, right? That's the whole outsourcing accountability piece again. But, I think if you want people to buy into what your message is about, you need to make it relatable. You need to make yourself relatable. You need to show vulnerability. So if I'm talking about productivity, which is something we run sessions on, I'll open with a story about how I, for many years, just thought that it was all about the hustle and the 12-hour workday and just doing as much as you can possibly do. And then I found myself burnt out and bordering on depression, because I would be waking up at 5 a.m. every day, hustling, not spending time socializing, not, avoiding, neglecting fitness and health and things of that persuasion. And ultimately, you can play that game, but when you're sitting on your deathbed, are you going to be looking back on life saying, oh man, I wish I had worked longer hours? Or no, you're going to say, no one says that. And I had a conversation with Michael Shermer, who basically said that, he's looked at records of last words. And most often what comes up is gratitude for family, friends. And whenever there is an element of regret, it's regretting that they didn't spend more time with family, friends, and just exploring the world. So I open with something like that if I'm running a session of some kind, and that glues people to what's happening, that wants them to know more, and then that gets them to start asking questions about, well, what did you do then? Did you get out of it? Are you still depressed? What's going on now? And so then you start talking about all these tools and techniques and that. And also like interspersing a lot of the stuff that in this podcast, which is like stats and quotes and some philosophy and stuff, that makes it more interesting than just here's the black and white technical stuff you can do, right? So people want to be entertained.
Definitely. And your book is entertaining. You have lots of personal stories in there, and we've talked about productivity and all that. And one thing that you could kind of make a mental comparison to is many chapters of 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. But I think a lot has changed since then, and you have some updates on things like VAs and things. What would you suggest to someone who read that, 8-10 years ago, and now they're looking to make these sort of changes? What's new in that space?
Oh man, it's a loaded question. I think there's a hell of a lot that's new in the 10 years since the 4-Hour Workweek came out. And I think before I go into what's new, one of the key fundamental differences, I think, is that this book is targeting people who perhaps have spent 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the corporate world. So they've picked up a lot of self-limiting beliefs and behaviors that don't really transfer well into entrepreneurship, like over-researching, over-analysis, over-planning, outsourcing accountability, all that sort of stuff, looking for it to be perfect before they release them. And so this book is really about breaking people out of that mindset and helping them transition and embrace the mindset of an entrepreneur, which is fundamental, going back to the speed thing we talked about earlier. But when it comes to what's changed in terms of the technical sort of landscape, like if I had to pick one thing, I would say automation tools, bar none. They can help you if you're a team of 3. If you leverage the right tools, you can operate like a team of 30. And I'm not over exaggerating here, because I've worked in large consulting firms, banks, government, startups, solopreneurship. I've seen the entire spectrum, and I am confident in saying that you could operate like a team of 30 with 3 people if you have the right tools. And I'm comparing that to a team of 30 in, say, a run-of-the-mill S&P 500 company. Now, in terms of the automation, one example I'll give you is, say, sales funnel. So a lot of our pipeline building is inbound leads, but the way we go about doing this is essentially tracking, so automating the monitoring of media mentions. So we sell services in, say, innovation and digital transformation. So we have all these keywords set up that we're monitoring for. Now, if an executive at a large company gets picked up for a keyword, say, digital transformation, we will then have an automated script that goes out to his LinkedIn profile that says something like, hey, Brendan, saw the article in the Wall Street Journal talking about how JP Morgan is investing in digital transformation. Just so happens that this is what we do. We've also worked with other banks such as XYZ. If you'd like to book in a short 10-minute conversation, here's my link. Now, that's all automated, and I get at least maybe 5 to 10 meetings a week that come in through that bot. And because these are executives who have demonstrated appetite and budget by virtue of being in this article, they're far more likely to buy from us than if we were to just cold call and just do cold outreach to people. So, man, that kind of thing, if you had a person doing that and reading all the newspapers and looking for signals, it would take them way longer. And then they'd have to manually type up the emails, find the emails, boom, this all happens in the back end. And if the tools aren't available, you can always have people build tools for you. But the other thing I would say, Zapier as well. Zapier is an awesome way to get tool A to talk to tool B to talk to tool C. So if someone downloads a lead magnet from my website, that automatically goes into our MailChimp. They automatically get an email of some kind. Like, you just got to automate all these things that people would normally, that oftentimes are done manually. And that's going to save you a lot of time. And by saving you time, it means you can work on things that align with your natural inclinations, as Robert Greene says. And if you do that, you create more value, but you're also more motivated because you're enjoying what you're doing and you're seeing results.
And that's the dream. I mean, I think that's so much of what your book gets at, is to be able to do more like that, whether that's in your company as someone who's an entrepreneur or outside your company on your own, but to be spending more time like that. Because nobody wants to be, oh, I'm off on my own, I'm an entrepreneur, but spending all day doing email and menial tasks and things because they didn't build a team or anything. That's not actually better. That's not really helping. So cool that you have this broader vision for what goes into that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of the impetus for writing this book came from, there's a couple of things. One was being surrounded by so many young, ambitious people with ability in the corporate world who were just, they had that creativity just beat out of them in many cases because they found themselves in a bureaucracy where they just had to play games and play politics and put their abilities on the back burner and just play these games essentially. And ultimately they end up feeling unfulfilled and living for the week. And this is why we're working with companies to help them unlock that talent and help them create more value for the world. And the other thing is that a lot of people I know in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, they just work crazy hours. And it's all well and good if every hour was created equal and you're getting a lot of value out of that. And the reality is, as you quoted deep work earlier, Cal Newport, you can only really get into deep work for about 4 hours, maybe 5 hours a day. And as Cal Newport says, that's all you need to see a transformational change in your work and your life. Sitting at your desk for 12 hours, it might satisfy your ego and might... Here's the thing. Human beings, we try to avoid things that confront our ego. And so if I'm working 12 hours a day, it means I don't need to confront my ego because I'm doing something that society tells me I need to do. I'm working hard for the money, but that means that I'm not going to go out there and try different things that might challenge my ego. Like last year, I got up onto the stand-up comedy stage or the open mic night circuit a number of times. And man, talk about challenging your ego. But by doing stuff like that, it sharpens the sword. You get more comfortable with discomfort, and being comfortable with discomfort is something that every entrepreneur needs to be. So, developing your social skills, all these things that people can just hide behind the veil of work to avoid. And that's another thing that the book kind of gets at.
Yes. So if someone wakes up from this and they say, okay, I want to get out of this, and what I know I want to do in particular is go start my own company. I've got a product, a service, I've got a thing. How do they find product market fit? That is something that came up again and again in the book, and I think can be easy for people to miss. They just get married to an idea, and then they forget about the product market fit?
Yeah, so I mean, what I've introduced in the book isn't fundamentally new when it comes to finding product market fit. But what I try to do in the book is bring together all of the key concepts one needs to learn to hit the ground walking. I wouldn't say running, that's a little bit overconfident, but definitely hit the ground walking rather than crawling or going backwards. So product market fit, essentially, when people fail to find product market fit, it's because they've got flawed assumptions that underpin their business model. So one thing you want to do is identify what are all of the assumptions that underpin my business model across customer, problem, solution, revenue model, cost structure, marketing channel, distribution channel. But then, of these assumptions, which ones are high impact in terms of if this isn't true, it's going to be lights out for my business, and which ones am I uncertain about? So you want to go for high impact and high uncertainty assumptions and go out and find ways to test those using low fidelity prototypes. So an example I like to use in this case is, say it's 2008 and we're building Uber. Your biggest assumption there is that people will trust the platform enough to get into a car with a stranger. Now, you could do what a lot of first-time entrepreneurs do and spend $100,000 building the app, spend another $50,000 on marketing, onboard a bunch of drivers, and then press go and find that people don't want this or that it's just not resonating for whatever reason. Or you could go out to a busy taxi rank on a Saturday night and just talk to people and actually offer them a ride home for $20, show them some ID, make sure it's all legit, and see how many of the 100 people you speak to, for example, say yes. Now, that's a low fidelity test. Doesn't cost you much money. It just costs you time. But by doing things like that, you can learn whether or not these key assumptions are true or false earlier in the piece. And then if they're false, start trying different things. Start tweaking the assumption. What you could start asking questions around what would make you trust the platform. What would you like to see next time that would make you say yes to get into a car for $20 and get a ride home? So that all comes back to speed. So doing things like this, it's all integrated with speed being fundamental to success. And one trap you want to look out for here is something I see entrepreneurs do all the time. They're like, yeah, I buy into that. Here's what I'm testing. And their assumptions will all be things we know to be true already. Like people will use a mobile app to search for things. It's like, yeah, people do that already. Like what is key to your business that you're unsure about that you need to test? Test that. Don't waste your time testing things we already know to be true. And don't fall into paralysis analysis testing absolutely every assumption that underpins your business. And then by taking that approach, whether it's through offline tests like that one, whether it's through landing pages and Facebook ads or whatever it is, you can learn a lot in a short amount of time. There are no guarantees, not to ensure you will succeed, but to radically increase the likelihood of success while decreasing the time and money you spend, which means you will give yourself a lot more time and money to figure things out, right? So as Eric Ries says, startups that win are the ones that learn the most before they run out of runway. So you've got to take this approach. And you also want to avoid being that one person who spends $100,000 on some app, it fails, and then you've got this big hole in your pocket, you're emotionally scarred, and you never return to entrepreneurship again.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Now, if you are that person, though, and you go through this and you find, oh my gosh, my product actually, my assumptions that I'm testing and things, it turns out this isn't anything special. Like we already know that people are going to use the mobile app to search. How can they then become that outstanding company? What can they do to look for that 10x advantage that you talked about, something that's going to make them and their product really be stellar, be something that people would want to go for?
Yeah. So that's a good question, because the 10x advantage, I think, is key to hone in on. So a lot of people will release a product and it might be a little bit better or a little bit cheaper, but that's not enough. I mean, in today's world, we are absolutely overrun with marketing messages on our phones, on our TVs, on the back of buses, on billboards, like wherever you go. But 99.9% of that stuff, we just tune that out in order to function in society in some meaningful way. Otherwise, we'd just be chasing buses and things like that, right? So, but to be 10x better, you've got to have really unique value propositions, something that really resonates with people's problem that's not being solved in a way that is good enough, right? So Seth Godin talks about the concept of the purple cow. You need to be remarkable. And he's like, I'm driving down the countryside with my family and there's cows everywhere. And we don't really look twice. But then over the horizon, we see a purple cow, and we're like, whoa, what the hell is this? And so you park and you walk over to the purple cow, you take some selfies with it for your Instagram story and all that sort of stuff. So, what's your equivalent to a purple cow? And that doesn't necessarily mean just product. It could be the way you present the brand, the message you're selling, the way you position it on social media, on various channels, the types of conversations you have with clients. Like, don't go out, if you're a B2B business, don't just try and sell people and here's our pitch deck and here's our demo, but spend that time actually trying to really understand them and their problems and then pitch accordingly, because they will see that as refreshing. So there are so many different levers you can pull to be perceived as being 5 or 10x better than everyone else, whether that's the way you conduct yourself as a human being, whether that is your features and your key unique value proposition, or whether that is the way you market yourself online. Because I see so many entrepreneurs say things like, I don't want to tell anyone about my idea because they might steal it. And it's like, well, man, good luck to them. Good luck to them if they steal it and they spend the next 2 or 3 years building your idea and succeed. But it's not about the idea, it's about the execution. And that requires that you think about all of these different building blocks underpinning your business model and figure out exactly how you can be that 10x better using one or more of the things that I've discussed.
Yeah. Do you think there is merit to that idea that somebody might steal your product if you're talking to people who have vastly more resources than you? If you're just getting going and somebody's, high up in an organization that they started and they're still very passionate about, but they also are established and have resources.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say that never happens, right? It happens. There are examples of, you look at the top social media companies stealing each other's, Facebook stealing, say, the stories function from Snapchat, essentially, for Instagram, Twitter, essentially copying Meerkat for Periscope. So it does happen at some level. But more often than not, the large company has their own core business. They're making money. They've got shareholders they're accountable to. They are overrun with policy and procedure, which slows them down. They probably could pursue the idea, but they might not get it right. And unless it generates, say, the 5% growth on their core business that they require in the first year, they're probably just going to kill it anyway. So this is why so many large organizations are actually partnering with startups, whether it's through accelerator programs or startup matching programs or setting up their own corporate venture capital arms, is because they know that they can bring the domain expertise, the assets, the resources, but what the startups bring is the enthusiasm, the speed, the being unencumbered by policy and process, all that sort of stuff. And that's actually a pretty good marriage when you bring those together. So I wouldn't worry about large companies stealing my idea, or just organizations with more resources. Like, it can happen, but at the end of the day, it's about how quickly or how much better can you execute than everyone else. Whereas if you're not sharing your idea, then with that whole Uber model, that example that I gave earlier, that means you're not learning. And if you're not learning, you're probably going to end up a country mile from product market fit. And so then, hey, you can have your idea, no one's going to have it, and you'll release it, but it's just not going to work, right? So if you're not sharing your idea, it's like protecting a unfertilized egg, hoping for a chick to hatch.
I like that. So if you are someone who's made this jump and you feel like you got a good product market fit and you're excited about it moving along, what's the one skill that you would suggest that person then focus on to really build and get good at? Is it sales? Is it leadership? What's the thing that they need to work on?
I'm not sure it's a skill as such. It's more so a character attribute, and that is persistence. It doesn't matter how good your idea is, how good your team is, your product, your past experience, your network. You will inevitably come up against all sorts of setbacks, all sorts of rejection. And the best way to deal with that is to just persist, have a strong relationship with adversity, have a healthy relationship with the word no, and keep moving forward. It's like former US President Calvin Coolidge: nothing in the world will take the place of persistence. Talent will not, genius will not, education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence alone is omnipotent, right? So that persistence and patience, that goes back to military strategy hundreds of years ago, where it's a war of attrition, right? So you've got to play the long game. So don't get swayed when things just aren't going your way in the first few months. And I like to say that no, the word no, you've got to get comfortable saying no. So protecting your time, not just taking every meeting that people ask of you, but also no. Because no is your guide. You can learn from no. You can learn what you could do better next time. And I find that every no gets you closer to yes. So even with my book deal for Employee to Entrepreneur, I went into that knowing that I was going to hear no a lot from agents, from publishers, and I did about 39 times. But then with the 40th attempt with Wiley, which is a huge publisher, they said, hey, this sounds interesting. Let's get a coffee. And after several coffees, we had a book deal. Now, that's just the reality, you know, and so putting your ego to the side, persisting, being patient, and having a very positive relationship with the word no, I think is going to differentiate you from smarter people, more technically gifted people who just don't like rejection.
Yeah. That positive relationship with the word no, that's a tough one, but that's a really great way to put it too. And I'm fortunate to hang out with a lot of people in Los Angeles and in this area who have their own businesses. And again, I find that this persistence thing is what hangs a lot of people up. It seems like they're kind of fighting through this slog when I talk to them. Oh, you know, I was thinking maybe I could sell, or, you know, there's this nonprofit that I really care about, and maybe I'd let the business go and go back to working for someone else, because it seems they get tired of the grind sometimes. But getting positive about that relationship with the word no could make a huge difference.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I always tell people, you know, I've read a hell of a lot of business books, but it's the books I've read about mindset that I think are as valuable, if not more valuable. You know, I mentioned Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, The Power of Now, even Mindset by Carol Dweck, incidentally, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I'm not sure if you need to beep that out, by Mark Manson. Like these books really help you build that mental fortitude to keep going. And it doesn't matter how technically gifted you are. If your mindset's not right, you're not going to make it.
Mm-hmm. I haven't read The Subtle Art. You recommend it?
I recommend it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, well, look, it depends on how many books of that persuasion you've read. So I found that it kind of regurgitated a lot of these old concepts for the contemporary audience. But for people who perhaps haven't read enough of that stuff, I think it's a really great place to start.
Cool. All right. Well, Steve, before I ask my last question, where should people look for you online?
People can find me at steveglaveski.com. That's Glaveski. There they'll find links to social media, to my Future Squared podcast. And as for the book, employee to entrepreneurial.io, they can head there and they can download a free bonus bundle full of tips, tools, tricks, techniques on productivity, sales, marketing, growth hacking, you name it. It's all there for free. So they can find that at employee to entrepreneurial.io.
Outstanding. All right. Now, Steve, my final question is, how can a leader create a culture of this entrepreneurial attitude?
Okay, so a leader firstly has to not just talk, they need to lead by example, because people will do what they see, not what you say. I think that is absolutely key. So in our organization, one thing that really started to build this culture was, I mean, I would preach experiment, but it's not until we actually started doing that people really embraced it and they saw the benefits. So one of our programs, it's been quite successful. It's called Lemonade Stand. It's a children's entrepreneurship program for 12-year-olds. Now, this program came about because one of my employees said, hey, you know, the office is pretty quiet in December and January because everyone's off on Christmas and New Year's holidays and things like that. But kids are on school holidays, and the nature of education is changing a lot, you know, and 40 to 60% of today's jobs could be automated in the next 10 to 15 years. So kids need to start learning to be more adaptable, to learn these entrepreneurial skills. What if we run something like a kids entrepreneurship program? We'll teach kids what we teach adults, but just pitch it at a 9 to 12-year-old level. And at that point, I could have said, what the hell do we know about working with kids? Like, this is a crazy idea. What if they have allergies and they start throwing chairs around the room and all this sort of stuff? But that's not what I said. I basically said, okay, interesting. Maybe spend $100 testing this. And so what they did was they set up an Eventbrite page with some basic course curriculum. They then spent $100 on Facebook ads where they targeted mum bloggers, people who like mum blog pages. So generally mums between 35 to 45 years old with young kids. And they ran this ad, and the cost per click was something like 50 cents. And so for the $100, we had about 200 clicks, and the conversion rate was about 10%, which meant we got 20 tickets for about $100, and each ticket was worth about $500, which meant 10 grand on a $100 investment, $9,000 plus margin. Okay, experiment valid, assumption valid. Let's run the session. And of course, there was kids with allergies and kids throwing chairs around the room and all that good stuff. But we learned from that and evolved, and now we've rolled that class out to over 1,000 kids around the world. We've just developed the online version that we're going to be rolling out this year, and embedding something into that helps kids raise capital online as well to further build their ideas, which I'm excited about. But that is the kind of thing you do if you want to build a culture. You don't just talk about it. You practice this stuff. You live it. And once people see results, then they really start buying into things, and that becomes their default setting. So, for whether you're a startup company, whether you're a large organization, stop talking about it and start doing it. That is my advice there.
That sounds like an amazing program that you have with Lemonade Stand. I love the story that you had in the book about the guy who sells you his product at the end of it too. I think that's a great note to wrap it on. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Brendan. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I always love to know what people are learning from these conversations. So if there's something that stood out to you, or if you have a question, something that we didn't hit on, something that I can use to make the next episode better, be sure to let me know down in the comments. I'll catch you next time.